Well, hello, friends. Welcome back. This episode is about yoga and being a highly sensitive person. A little bit about me. I am a yoga teacher, and I am inspired by my community and my studies. And from that, I will pull inspiration to make various yoga events, series, workshops, classes, and my latest series has been Yoga for the Sensitive Soul. I want to give a shout out to my friend Sterling for giving it that title. And then also, side note, shout out to another friend, Melly, for inspiring this name, Yoga and Podcast, for giving me that name. Thank you. Y'all are my muses. But I personally find this subject matter very interesting, and I have a lot of content on the subject. Last year, I didn't do a series. It started as Yoga Skills for Empaths, a 2-hour workshop. And then I did about 3 of those, and I learned a lot. You learn every time you teach workshops. But I learned that maybe the word empath, it can be a little bit of a buzzword, a little bit of a turnoff for some people. So actually in this episode, I'll talk about what the difference is between highly sensitive and empathic, among other things. So I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, yoga and the highly sensitive. So I always like to start off this podcast with definitions, so we're on the same page. So let's define yoga. And yoga, you could define it a lot of ways, I guess. But it's an old discipline, an ancient Indian discipline, and it's both spiritual and physical. There are 8 limbs in the practices. They use breathing techniques, exercise, and meditation. Moving on to what is highly sensitive. A highly sensitive person is someone who experiences physical, mental, or emotional responses to stimuli. Someone whose volume is on 12 at all times. For example, if there's a highly sensitive person looking at a sunset, it is the most beautiful sunset, and it's glorious. If a non-sensitive person looks at the same sunset, is it as beautiful? Maybe not, right? So everything is amplified to this person. Okay, well, what is an empath? Now that we know what a highly sensitive person is. Now, they could be separate. Empath has the ability to understand what someone is experiencing. They can feel what others are feeling. They also have the ability to absorb and take on other people's physical and emotional stuff, good or bad. For example, I'll tell you a personal story. My previous career, I was a Pilates teacher. I worked with a lot of post-rehab people, a lot of low back pain. I would work with people one-on-one. A lot of them had low back pain, so they would work with me for an hour, then they would leave, and they felt great. No more back pain. And then I'd go home with the back pain, right? And I had no idea I was an empath. I had no idea that I did that until I discovered yoga, and I had mentors who taught me this. So that's a little side note. Another thing to think about a empathic person. Well, 2 things. You might be an empath if you're the one at the party, you're at a really fun party, and there's like always that person with the sob story that comes up to you and tells you their sob story, and you're having a good time. You might be an empath. So you might attract that energy vampire type. One more way to look at being an empath is you have this unprotected Wi-Fi network that everybody wants to get on, and you haven't set the password yet. Password meaning the boundaries, right? And then you have a weak Wi-Fi. It's 2020, folks. I have to use that, I guess, analogy. All right, moving forward. So from here on out, let's just lump empath, highly sensitive into highly sensitive, just to make it clear. So you could be both, you could be one or the other. For the sake of this podcast, we're going to just call it highly sensitive. Okay, in my little workshop or in my little series, I talk about the strengths and challenges of being highly sensitive. So let's get into that. Highly sensitive people typically can be really good listeners, so really great friends. They are quite attuned to others. Some have the power to heal. They have this really amazing presence about them. They are present. They know how to hold space well. They can see the symbolism in life as it's happening to them or to loved ones. They're sort of a visionary in that way. Okay. Now, the challenges of these highly sensitive people is they can attract energy vampires. Somebody who sucks the energy out of you would be an energy vampire. And from that, they can get very fatigued, the codependency, enmeshment in relationships. There's also a lot of negativity around being sensitive, and so they can have a negative self-image around that. And I want to take a side note because this is a very personal subject. I hated being called sensitive. I hated it. And one of my mentors told me, oftentimes the thing that you don't like about yourself is the best part about you. And in all this, doing my work, working on what it's, how to self-keep and self-preserve, being highly sensitive, what I've started to learn, and it's taken me probably a decade now, is that the more you learn what your self-keeping or your self-care is for your body, the more you can give the world all your strengths of being highly sensitive and minimize those challenges. And so that's what the whole point of this series I do is about, is figuring out what those are, which I'll go into more. Okay. So going into that 4-week series, I'm looking at all my notes. It's very organized. It's actually really easy to do podcast. I had no idea. Okay, so the Sensitive Soul series is all about yoga and subjects adjacent to yoga. So we touch on Ayurveda, which is a sister science of yoga. It's like ancient Indian medicine. We touch on the chakra system. If you don't know what chakras are, there's 7 energy centers within your own body, and they pertain very much to yoga. We also do breath work, meditation practices. So all of this is yoga based. And it's an exploration, but with the intent on remembering who we are as individuals and what our individual needs are. So my job is to give people the experience of, say, a chakra meditation. What does that feel like? What does it feel like to do Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breathing? And they take what they want from the series, they leave what they don't, and the idea is they apply what they learned in the series to their daily lives, or every few days. Have you been wanting to start a podcast but not sure where to begin? If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. I really love how easy it is to create. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you to all the major platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor is spelled Anchor. So why specifically yoga? Well, yoga is roughly translated the yoke, meaning to link the mind to the body. I think it's especially easy for the sensitive to disconnect in this way. The world's on level 12, it's overwhelming, I find, for some. Being a former Pilates teacher, which is also a mind-body discipline, it doesn't necessarily focus on yoga and the nervous system the same way yoga does. In yoga, there are 8 limbs. Only one is that asana practice, the yoga postures, the one that you go to a yoga class and everyone's moving, right? Something really interesting I find about yoga, there's 8 limbs, there's a lot of depth. And one piece is a code of conduct, personal restraints, the niyamas and the yamas. And so you can think of it maybe like almost the 10 Commandments, but not. Sasya is cleanliness of the body and mind. Tapas is self-discipline. Svadhyaya is study of the self. And so these are just some examples of these. These are sort of the integral pieces. It's more than just yoga postures, but we are taking the time to cleanse the body and the mind. So there's practices in Ayurveda that we touch on in the series to help cleanse the body and the mind, the self-discipline of the self-care, the self-keeping, the self-preserving, the study of the self, meaning it sounds kind of corny, but I have people take quizzes throughout the series. I have them take an empath quiz. I have them do a dosha quiz. And I love it, and I think they kind of love it too. And it's a way to just kind of see where you're at and the spectrum of being an empath, what your constitution is in Ayurveda, in the dosha system, to get a better sense of yourself. And then yoga has a whole practice called pranayama, breath work. And this, I think, is a game changer if you're highly sensitive. Not only do breath practices put you in your body, connect your mind to your body, remind you that you are whole again, but they also help to regulate the nervous system, which if you're living in a world where everything's on level 12, it can be overwhelming. So having something to down-regulate your nervous system that you can access to at any time is quite nice. Going back to the yoga and the more what we might know of yoga, the actual asana, the postures, a slower paced yoga, the slower pace can facilitate putting you back into your body. You can take your time to feel the earth beneath you as you set your feet on the ground, as you set your knees on the ground, right? You can slow down enough to deepen your breath, elongate your breath, and then match that with your movement. You can start to feel the connection between the earth and sky. So a great example of this is mountain pose. Mountain pose is where you're standing up. Your feet are 4 to 6 inches apart. They're parallel to one another. Your hands are at your heart in prayer. And you can start to root your feet down into the earth, and you'll feel this rebound of the earth pushing back up to support your feet. When you notice that, you can relax your shoulders down your back and then start to lift the base of the skull up to the sky. And you might even start to feel the sky pulling the crown of your head upward. And this feeling of being held between earth and sky, if you're highly sensitive, I think you can easily access it. It takes practice, but there's nothing more, in my opinion, comforting than feeling that universal alignment. And then it feels like something bigger than you is holding you in place. I don't know, it's very beautiful. So I had a lot of coffee this morning. I could go on tangents, but I won't. So the takeaway Yoga specifically can help regulate your nervous system. It can create mindfulness, awareness. It helps to facilitate embodiment. One of my students shared this really beautiful quote with the group, and I have found it useful for myself in bringing my energy back. So I'll read it to you. I call my energy back to me. All my energy that is scattered other places, I call back to me. All the energy in my body that is not of me, I return to the earth to be transformed into something greater. I lovingly release all energy that no longer serves me, all the energy inside of my body, all the intentions I set forth is of me for me. That quote is by Sarah Faith Gottsdeitner. I hope I'm saying that right. All right, guys, that's the end of this podcast. If you have requests, comments, please comment. I'm on iTunes. Please leave me a review. That would be really helpful. I'm just starting out. You can email this podcast at yogaandpodcast@gmail.com. And is spelled out, so it's YOGAAND podcast@gmail. I'm also on Instagram. My handle is Yoga and Podcast. See you next Tuesday.